The sun dipped low behind the western hills, casting long shadows across the dusty plains of Clearwater County. A soft wind carried the scent of sage and baked earth through the quiet town. The streets were nearly empty, except for a few ranch hands finishing their work and the creak of a wooden sign swinging in front of the old general store dot inside that store. A thin woman stood by the counter, clutching a small cloth bag filled with coarse flour. Her hands trembled as she counted a few worn coins. "Ma'am," the storekeeper said gently, "that's not quite enough for the sugar." She smiled faintly, her face lined with weariness yet lit by a quiet strength. "That's all right, Mr. Harris. The children don't need sweet things today. Bread will do just fine." Her name was Clara Mayfield, a widow who had buried her husband 2 winters back after a ranch accident. She lived in a small cabin outside town with her 2 children, little Sarah and Luke. Times had been hard. Clara mended clothes for others and baked bread to sell when she could. But work was scarce, and flour scarcer still dot as she stepped outside with her small bag. The wind picked up, brushing strands of her brown hair from beneath her bonnet. She looked up at the open road ahead and whispered a prayer, not for wealth, but for strength to keep her family fed one more week. That evening, Clara took her wagon down the trail leading home. Halfway through, she noticed a man sitting by the roadside, his horse grazing nearby. He looked like he'd traveled far. Dusty boots, a worn hat, and a coat that had seen better days. His shoulders were broad, his hands scarred, yet his posture showed exhaustion rather than danger. She slowed her wagon. "Sir, are you all right?" She called Dot. The man lifted his gaze, revealing tired eyes beneath the brim of his hat. "Reckon I'm fine, ma'am. Just resting a spell." Horse threw a shoe a few miles back. Something in his voice carried loneliness. Clara hesitated, then said softly, "It's near supper time. If you've nowhere to go, you're welcome to stop by my cabin down the trail. It ain't much, but there's a warm stove." He nodded politely, though surprise flickered in his expression. "That's mighty kind of you." When they arrived at Clara's small cabin, Sarah and Luke ran out to greet her. They stared wide-eyed at the stranger until Clara smiled. "Children, this man's horse lost a shoe. He'll rest here tonight," she explained Dot inside. Clara kneaded what little dough she had left and baked a small loaf of bread. The smell of fresh bread filled the room, comforting and simple. She set the table with carefree chipped plates and a pot of stew, mostly made from vegetables and a little salt pork. Dot as they ate. The stranger remained quiet for a time, glancing occasionally at the children's eager faces. When he finally spoke, his tone carried humility. "You folks live out here alone?" "Yes," Clara said. "It's been just us since my husband passed. We manage." He nodded slowly. "That takes courage." After supper, she placed the last piece of bread before him. "You should take this, sir. You look like you've been riding a long while." He looked at her, his blue eyes glinting in the lamplight. "You're offering me your last loaf, ain't you?" Clara smiled faintly. "A body's gotta feed another when they can. That's how we make it through." For a long moment, the man didn't move. Then, with quiet reverence, he took the bread and said, "Ma'am, you just fed more than my stomach. You fed my soul." When Clara awoke at dawn, she found the stranger already outside, fixing his horse's shoe with a set of fine tools she hadn't noticed before. He worked with skill and patience, humming a low tune. "Morning," she greeted. "Morning, ma'am," he replied. "Didn't mean to disturb you. Figured I'd earn my keep before moving on." Before he left, he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small pouch. He handed it to her. "What's this?" she asked, startled. "Just a little something for the kindness you showed a weary traveler." She tried to refuse. "Sir, I can't take your money." He smiled. "It ain't payment. It's gratitude." With that, he tipped his hat and rode away. Clara didn't open the pouch until later that week. Inside were several gold coins, more money than she'd ever held. Her hands shook as she stared at them. She used the coins wisely, bought flour, mended the roof, and even purchased books for her children. But she often thought of the quiet stranger who'd shared her table that night. Then one morning, a letter arrived. It bore a seal she didn't recognize, a simple C, surrounded by a horseshoe. She opened it carefully. Greater than Mrs. Mayfield, your bread and kindness reminded me what truly matters. I've built and bought much in this life, but I'd forgotten the taste of simple grace. Enclosed is a deed to a small plot adjoining your land. Consider it a gift from one soul to another. The name made her gasp. Colt Weston, the reclusive millionaire rancher who owned half the valley. People said he was hard and silent. A man who'd lost more than money could mend. Clara sank onto the chair, tears filling her eyes. Months later, when spring returned to Clearwater, a knock sounded on Clara's door. When she opened it, Colt Weston stood there, freshly shaven, his clothes clean but still simple. I figured I'd check how that new land's working out for you, he said. His voice soft. Mr. Weston, she breathed. I never expected. He raised a hand. Just Colt. I ain't here as a rancher. Just a man who never forgot a loaf of bread. They walked together to the edge of the new field, where Clara had started planting. The children ran nearby, laughing as the wind tousled their hair. I didn't know who you were, she said quietly. That's what made it mean something, Colt replied. Most folks around here see the money first. You saw a man hungry and gave him your last piece. She looked down and honest. It was only bread. He shook his head. No, ma'am. Bread keeps the body alive, but kindness, that saves a man's spirit. For a moment, they stood in silence, listening to the gentle rustle of wheat seedlings. Seasons as the months rolled by, Colt began visiting more often. He'd bring seed for the fields or lumber for repairs, always claiming it was leftover from the ranch. But his visits grew longer, and laughter began to return to Clara's home. One summer evening, the children persuaded him to stay for supper again. Clara baked fresh bread, the same recipe she'd made the night he first appeared. When the loaf came out golden and fragrant, Colt smiled warmly. I'd cross every mile of dust in this country to taste that again. Clara laughed softly. Careful, Mr. Weston, that sounds like flattery. Not flattery, he said, his voice sincere. Truth. That night, under the glow of the lantern, he looked at her and said, Clara, I used to think the richest man was the one who owned the most land. But after that night, after that bread, I reckon the richest man is the one who's been shown mercy. By autumn, their adjoining lands had flourished. The townsfolk marveled at how Clara's once barren fields now thrived with golden wheat. Colt donated new farming tools and hired local families, giving jobs to those in need. At the annual harvest fair, Colt stood before the townspeople and raised a toast. There's a woman in this town, he began, who taught me that true wealth isn't in what you own, it's in what you give. When I was lost and weary, she offered me bread. That small act reminded me I still had a soul worth saving. Clara, standing shyly at the edge of the crowd, felt tears well up. Colt's eyes found hers as he continued. So if ever you think you've got too little to give, remember her. A simple loaf can change a man's heart. The crowd applauded warmly, and Sarah tugged at her mother's sleeve. Mama, she whispered, that's who he's talking about. Clara smiled, her eyes glistening. Yes, sweetheart, but it's not just me. It's kindness. The eve after the celebration, Colt offered Clara a ride home in his wagon. The air was crisp, the sky painted with streaks of orange and violet as they rode. He turned to her, voice low. Clara, I ain't been good at saying things plain, but I reckon I'd like to spend the rest of my days not just eating your bread, but breaking it beside you. Her heart fluttered. Are you a skin, what I think you're a skin? He smiled. Yes, ma'am. I'm a skin if you consider Mackin a lonely cowboy's home a little warmer. Tears filled her eyes, but her smile was radiant. Colt Weston, you already did that yourself the night you sat at my table. He reached over and gently took her hand. Then let's call this the start of a new chapter where no one goes hungry, body or soul. Moral of the story: greater than kindness doesn't need wealth. It only needs a willing heart. A single loaf of bread, offered in compassion, can fill not just an empty stomach, but an empty soul.